Hi, Frode. Hi, Frode.
Hello,
Hi, Frode. Can you hear me?
I can. I'm just going to check, make sure.
Okay. I have to leave the train in the next station, and then I go into a region where the signal, the Wi-Fi is bad. So I will just want to listen, maybe without video, and see a little bit how you're working, and that you're really alive. This is good to know.
Yes, it's all live, and because it's Tuesday, I have no idea who will be here. I know that Tom Haymes will be late. He sent me a message, but we'll see how it goes. I see your internet comes and goes. That's absolutely fine, of course. Hey, Brandel. I think Eric is coming and Tom is coming, but he will be a bit late. But I'm very glad you're here because I have a model question. A model element question, obviously. So
yeah.
one of the key things about EPUB is, of course, that it is HTML in a box. So having wrapped my brain, as you know, a lot over the point of working in XR rather than flats, one of the benefits seems to be if you have a paper with 3D stuff in it, models and whatever, you should probably be able to use it. So if we put the model element into the HTML in an EPUB and make the reader aware of it, doesn't that make sense?
Yes. So a so an EPUB is a web it's a web view of any kind. So anything that's doing the rendering of a web view on most Apple platforms, that is a WebKit view. So that includes Apple Books. I don't know actually what, for example, the Kindle reader does on iOS. But my understanding is at this point in all of the sort of the OS 227 fleet that everybody supports model element or would have the ability to. Um, to my knowledge, that isn't reflected in support in, for example, Mail. But we definitely have tested bespoke web views and verified that they work there. So um, but not all EPUB viewers are WebKit views. Some of them will be Chromium, some of them may be Gecko, I don't know. So and some of them may be bespoke sort of simplified things because, for example, EPUBs don't tend to support JavaScript. Um, Model element has the ability to be completely declarative in the sense that you are only using the HTML markup for it to say like this is autoplay, this is looping, this is in stage mode equals orbit. Um, and so if it's the case that a web view, say in Apple Books or whatever, is simply passing those things through and the runtime, the web view or the WebKit view is able to ingest it, then I think that should work. But yeah, it would be a good reason to get other people on board, to get the Chromiums and the Geckos and things like that to be able to do it as well.
Hi, Tom. Yeah,
Good morning.
thank you for saying you were going to be late. So that's cool. I think Eric's coming too. Peter cannot make it. Yeah, we're talking about the model element in EPUB, because EPUB is, of course, HTML. Because thinking around, the point of working in spatial environments, spatial stuff certainly must be among it. And I've spent a little too much time and effort on the Interatlas. This weekend, we went to the island of Sark, S-A-R-K. It's in the English Channel. It's the first ever dark night island by the International Astronomy thing or whatever. So you can just lie in a field and look up and you can really see a lot of stars. So because of that, and it does come back to what we're talking about, I added a few things to the Interatlas. One of them is a view where all the stars that are visible to the human eye are shown. There's a lot of them, over 100,000, but they're all there and they render perfectly well. So then, of course, I added the ability to highlight famous stars. I'll just...
You mean like Brad Pitt and so on?
Hi, Astral. Just to fill you in really briefly, Brandel and I started talking about the model element to have that because it's part of HTML inside an EPUB. And I'm now doing a roundabout way of talking about spatiality with an extension of the Interatlas Vision OS app. So because we could see the stars so well, we went to a very, very amateur, let's call it, observatory. And it was really, really amusing. And the guide kept talking about all these constellations, which I truly don't care about. But the fact that he kept talking about it, was interesting. And he kept talking about how different human societies have seen them and all of these things. Because in spatial terms, they're nonsense. You can have what we see as a flat square, but then you look at it in 3D and it's really elongated, right? So I actually added that to Interatlas. And that's the reason I'm talking to you guys about it. It's really fascinating. If you stand where the solar system is, just in that space, and then you look out, they kind of make sense. Then you go to the side and they make no sense. And this is something from the very earliest, when Brandel entered the group, was talking about how even having stereo on a 2D screen is one thing. It's kind of cool. You get a bit of depth. But when you can easily move around it, it becomes something else. And I'm wondering if that inspires you guys to think of shapes in a different way. I don't know.
Well, obviously the constellations are going to look different if you're in another solar system.
Yeah, no, exactly. You know what? I'll just show you. I think this
But
because I
and you should be able to. I think you can computationally simulate that to a degree.
Yeah. No, 100%. That's
So
what it did. So what it did was also, for the record, two things that are kind of important to say from my side. One is I'm starting to experiment with local LLMs. There are some really big ones that can run locally, and with a M4 Ultra 128 gigs of RAM, that looks to be very feasible. And also to make really, really clear, because there's been some confusion, when I talked about us building a reading experience for the hypertext papers, I was talking about, I'm just clicking build. I was, of course, talking about the way we make apps. People would bring their own data. I'm not going to go to ACM and download stuff and make a new kind of a demo product. I think that's just important to put down. Okay, hang on, share.
well, I think, this is kind of relating to both discussions. Everything you're describing requires files or sources to be deconstructible. In other words, you have to be able to take them apart. If you want to see the stars from a different place, you have to be able to look at those stars as individual objects rather than as a map of the heavens, right? As seen from Earth.
Yeah.
You have to be able to, say, okay, on Alpha Centauri, these elements of the star field are going to change, and these aren't, maybe.
You can see the view now.
But the same thing is true with the discussion you and Brandel were having about EPUB when I came in, is that you're essentially looking at a problem of being able to deconstruct what's inside. Again, we'll get back to the whole thing I've always harping on, is the idea of documents being collections of ideas. And it's the same way as with the star system. If you could look at, again, the map of the whole thing, or you can look at all of the different star systems as independently moving objects. And that's, it's the same problem.
Yeah, you can see my view, right?
Yep.
So this is the Oort cloud, which is massive. Our solar system proper or normal is way in there, right? A tiny little thing. So this is what you were talking about. So in this room, and they're really, really tiny. In fact, if I change the scale, actually, so I can. Oh yeah, these sliders don't work yet, but you can change the scale. But here's the thing: if I now do constellations, somebody doesn't that build right now? Okay, that doesn't. That's really annoying. But at least you can see how different the stars are than what you would only look at them from this point, right? So just completely agreeing with what you were saying, Tom. I'm just going to have to ask it to rebuild that tab. Sorry, guys. That was a bit of a waste of time.
But I mean, if you're going to create a document with, totally blind the document format that you've been talking about. Sorry, total
Origami
brain.
text.
Yeah, origami.
Yeah.
The assumption there is that, with origami is it's a series of folds, but if the whole idea is that you can take it apart, without, and then see the whole thing from a different orientation, or build something else with that piece of paper that you have. And that's a good metaphor, but it involves a kind of document that I think a lot of, Amazon, for instance, one of my bugaboos is, the problem with Kindle is that it's a box. You can't work on it unless you're in the Kindle app, and you can't, deconstruct the ideas or pull them out or associate them with anything else, not even other books in Kindle, which I think is particularly annoying. But if right now, what I am doing with Claude is I am basically going through and having it go through all my file system and look for things that I've forgotten about. And I have many books that I've read over the years that have parts of them that I've forgotten about, or that I remember, but I don't remember which book they're from anymore, things like that. And so if it's going to be a truly useful tool, that's the kind of thing you're going to need to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, we do need to decide on, as we talked about for quite a while, units of knowledge. And from my perspective, until persuaded otherwise, the container of knowledge is EPUB, because it's kind of accepted. It's basically HTML, and it can put all kinds of stuff inside the wrapper, right? It's kind of limitless, other than our own imagination, right? So, Tom, one thing I wanted to ask you to talk about is you talk about knowledge navigator and so on. Are you the elements within that? Are you talking that it's essentially a database, or is it important also to have objects? What is the stuff of?
No, I mean, the problem with database is it assumes a structure. It assumes an ontology. The thing that really is attracting me to AI in a way that other things don't, that previous technologies didn't, is the fact that before we had to impose a structure on the data, just like we did for a library. If there's really no functional difference between an access database and a library and a library card catalog. It works basically the same way. It's just a little faster. And to me, AI changes that in a way that it's only the only connections that matter are the ones that are relational, and those can shift. And I think to me, precisely the thing that drives everybody crazy about AIs, and the fact that you can't get the same answer out of them twice, is to me the most interesting part, because I use them primarily to shift my own perspective on things. When they start getting consistent because they're copying me too much, I'm like, yeah, no, don't just harp me,
But
right.
Tom, that's I mean, when I say database, I just mean a store of stuff versus clearly.
I prefer the word corpus, maybe. Because a corpus is a disorganized database, or a non-organized database, maybe around a single subject, maybe around multiple subjects. And the idea with the knowledge navigator is to be able to go in there and visualize connections between ideas across any span of data. And depends on what you're looking for, and depends on what you're doing. It may be, again, office documentation, emails, SharePoint, whatever, going back however many years your company's got a digital footprint, and then looking for patterns in there and looking for lost opportunities, or things that you may have missed in the past and now can take advantage of. In the case of research, I'm trying to do this a little bit with Claude right now, is that, I've got a thing I call the second brain. I've been using Notebook LM for this over a while, but I still have to manually put all of those sources into a specific subject-oriented database, in a sense, and have them look.
How do you literally see it? I mean, are we still talking, because you have these beautiful images I've seen before,
Mhm.
But how do you want to see it? The reason
I
I'm
think
asking is twofold. It's partly because you've been thinking about it, and I haven't seen much implementation talk from you lately, so I'd like to hear that. But it's also in my own mind. For instance, now, last week I said we need to have a great presentation of the hypertext PDFs when the user themselves upload it into our app in XR, but it's an over-trivialized thing.
Mhm.
So I have a feeling that Brandel may suggest add further context, and I would agree with him, and I would love to talk about that. But from your perspective, Tom, of a knowledge navigator, what are the
Mhm.
things you would like to see?
So there's two categories. There's the weak connection and the strong connection. So it depending on what you want to do with it. So there may be a use case, there's a use case where, again, like the one I just described, where you want to look for clusters of information, uh, things that you don't think go together, but actually do. They have more connections than you think they do. So that's the strong link. Then there's the weak link. There's the I'm working on something and I know I've never covered this before, or I've been working on this in this particular paradigm, discipline, whatever you want to call it. And now I want to be able to see, has someone else, even in another discipline, been working on the same thing? So now I'm looking for a weak link. Now I'm looking for, oh, well, this biologist is talking about exactly the same thing I'm talking about. They're just using different language to
So,
say
Tom,
it. Yeah.
this is very important in Astral. If you have perspectives on this, I would absolutely very, very much like to hear it.
Hmm.
Strong and weak links are important because there's also bindings, position, spatial hypertext, all of these things. But on a very implementational level, when
Hmm.
and how do you want to see it? So you mentioned now a great example. So let's look at that. You're writing something and you're kind of running out of steam, I guess, and you want to know, has someone else written about something like this in a different field, right? Beyond that
Correct.
being an LLM query, um, how do you imagine that kind of being brought forth to show strong connection?
Well, no, that would be a weak connection scenario, but the
Yeah, I
idea
agree.
would
Sorry.
be, yeah. So I think the more I think about it, and this is something that I just recently started, like a month or two ago, started having to confront in a way. But the more I think about it, I think it's going to have to be a switch. Would you want to cast the wide net, or do you want to, do you want to crack or pack, as a gerrymander would say? But so depending on which one you use. So yeah, in the scenario you're talking about, the idea would be, okay, I'm working on this cluster of information. Where are all the related clusters that are available to me out there if you go look at, say, the scholarship or open source scholarship or something like that? And this, again, is where I start running into roadblocks around closed file formats and paywalls, because those are, I hate to say it, capitalist institutions that are designed to generate profit rather than generate knowledge. And so, yeah, but that's how that would work.
So a question for all three of you, and I'm so grateful for this question session. Um, for me, I've realized that one of the core spines running through my knowledge stuff are my own
Mhm.
thoughts. I have an idea here, I have an idea there, right? I'll just see Benja's joining. Hi, Benja.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Good, good. You caught us just in the middle of talking about many things, and right now, um, what is the stuff of maybe our own knowledge spaces? So I was just about to say, and I'm questioning if you guys have the same experience, that for me, a central spine with all my knowledge stuff are my own ideas and my own thoughts. So, having some way to capture that in a way that in the future, when I need inspiration or what am I working on or what am I doing, they are available, but in an environment that has access to everything else that we're working on. This is in context. Sorry, Benji, we're going through a lot in the beginning of first starting with EPUB is brilliant, partly because, okay, no, that's fine, Brandel. So Brandel has worked on developing a model element for HTML, which we've seen over the years. It's powerful and but also very, very interesting and relevant. So the beginning discussion today was in the HTML and in EPUB, couldn't we have the model element? And Brandel said, yeah, of course you can. He said it in a nicer way, but that's how I paraphrase it back to him. So now we're looking at a little bit of what is the stuff we want to have in there. Of course, we can all imagine a scientific paper where, molecules there and beakers and maps. Of course we can, and that's really cool and important. We have to do it. Tom has been working on a knowledge navigator, and I try to pull Tom a little bit along the implementation line because it can often get the AI has a cluster and vagueness there. So Brandel, before you have to hop off, based on everything we've just gone through, is there any specific things you would like to add or question or?
So I, partly as a result of the tools that currently exist, but also I would say my way of making sense of the world is not especially egocentric. I don't tend to gravitate, for example, toward games that have where one plays a character per se. And so and I don't spend a lot of time curating sort of from the perspective of identity. People make things and arrange things according to their likes and things like that. That's valid. It's not what I do. And so I wouldn't, to that end, I think it follows, organize things. And so it would be preferable for me for the implicit organization to fall out based on things like where I was when something happened or how certain ideas were arranged, rather than sort of a volitional sort of structure that's imposed on it as a consequence of my tastes and preferences, because I simply don't have them. Hopefully that makes sense.
It makes sense. And obviously, I've been very inspired by many aspects of your work. One of the things I've done, of course, in the app where I note down my notes, it notes where I am. So I have, and it puts in my calendar. So I already, for something as simple as writing and reading in a contextual space, basic thought for me, something worth putting down. Now I can look for it based on location and time, and hopefully with other aspects. Now, the thing is, the challenge I set last week shouldn't be sniffed at too easily. And I'm wondering about all of your perspective on, imagine opening 30, they are PDFs by default, things in a space. It's not that hard to go through them. I already have a prototype where they're all on a grid. You pull it towards, then it opens. You have all the pages, so you can just walk and read. It's kind of cool, but not that super useful. If you like it, you grab it, throw it up, and then it's liked. I call it top of the pile rather than liked. If it's not that interesting, you throw it down and it becomes set aside. So that's semi-neat. But couldn't we expand so that when you go through these 30 or so new papers, that you have not just like an AI summary or something like that, but you have maybe your whole library or something brought to bear to help you contextualize? Would that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, like essentially that's what I'm trying to do for myself, at least. I will say I kind of share Brandel's outlook on things. If I feel like the pathway is becoming too predictable, then that makes me uncomfortable because I don't want to be the guy who convinces himself that he's the most brilliant person in the world, and therefore everything else is secondary. I approach the world with a high degree of skepticism and also wonder in that regard because I'm always looking for the next thing, or not the next thing, but the thing I've missed. And that may be my ADD playing itself out. But my pathway is there. It's interesting because I've had a much more consistent pathway than I give myself credit for, and it has taken AI to show me that pathway. As this is all basically the same thing. You're just hitting it from different sides, kind of thing. So for me, the most important thing is, I want to be the astronomer who is looking at the stars rearranging the stars and so that I can understand them, making my own constellations, if you want to put it that way, to continue with the metaphor. But I don't, and I want to see something new and exciting as a result. And so if you think about ideas as stars, it's the same thing, and I don't necessarily want the same constellations night after night. I want, oh, well, if you connect it up this way, you're going to get a different constellation. You have a frog instead of a horse, and something like that, right?
Tom, that's really, really interesting. We're going to have to really think about that. I just want to say, Brandel, Interatlas for Vision OS is available in the normal App Store now. There's a usability thing that I want to fix. Currently, you have to pinch out to get a data sheet. Nobody's going to know that. So now it's a button for the next release, a button on your arm. Other than that, it's all there. Tom, I wish you could be in there, because what you're talking about with the constellations and the dots, when we're not in the headset, to think other than a cube or a single circle, I find extremely difficult. But once you're in there and the room becomes something else. Anyway, that was a lot of talk. And Benja, you just came in here and suddenly all this stuff. I wonder if you have a perspective on it.
Yeah, I don't know. Things that bubble up for me. I like, Brandel, what you were talking about. I was kind of inspired by, I think, Astral Druid at the end of last session. I think after I had dropped, I went back and watched that bit. Astral, you were talking about, I'm sure I'll butcher this and use the wrong words, but something about you were considering bias in how we do these things, or frames, like perspectives. I thought it was a very interesting challenge. Stuff that I've been prototyping this week's been around how could you almost codify like a poor man's lens or perspective or frame, because the way we interact with our own like most sacred note or whatever is quite different, and it's going to be based off of how we use it, and also how we're just kind of structured, like our web of associations that maps all the way back, So to have one structure to rule them all, though practical and really important, I feel like it's always going to be a little clunky unless you wrote it for yourself.
Yeah, you have to be Sauron in that respect.
But
which is bad for everybody else.
Yeah. If you could codify a lens or perspective, though, maybe you could have like a radical subjectivity. And that you might almost want to encapsulate the context of how, the word extrusion is used in papers 1 through 7 as is different than, 8 through 30. I don't know. This stuff gets real abstract, and
or how it
has
was used
multiple
100 years ago
definitions.
versus today.
This is
Sure.
This is amazing. Thank you for bringing that up. And yeah, this is hugely timely. Perspective, of course, is basically what we are, and it is very important to carry that with us. And spatially, I mean, maybe you all know spider diagrams, right? Where normally it's flat circle, but if something is very it's pulled in this direction. Or I first learned it from Battlefield with different rifles, not the best topic, but whatever. Maybe here would be how powerful it is at a distance and how fast. So you would have a different shape depending on the characteristics. What you're talking about with perspective, I can imagine maybe a 3D shape that we build over time based on our stated positions in the world. And if we could have that in an environment with other people's shapes, I mean, it's like even here in this community, there are some people who have very, very different perspectives. That's a good thing if we can respect each other and try to see it from other perspectives. So sorry for talking a lot after that, but I'm very excited you brought it up. Astral, I'm sure you have something to say on that since you sparked it.
All right. My mind is slightly blank at the moment because I've been kind of puzzling over. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the viable system model. It was It was something that was
Could you please spell that or put it in the chat? I couldn't hear it perfectly.
the viable system model, VSM. It was proposed by Stafford Beer in the 70s. He was a cyberneticist. He's a UK steel guy. And basically, it was a system that would remain viable in any environment. And they used it to run businesses. It's a recursive model, so it can work at different scales. And the problem of organizing a database for this model is very difficult and very interesting. It's something I've just been kind of yeah, I don't really have much to add right now. I'm sorry, but that's just kind of where my thought has been lately. I have this. The frames that we're coming from is a. I'm glad you appreciate that implementation.
It knocks up against something my friend Bruce Horn mentioned yesterday. Polycrisis, kind of the opposite in a way, or kind of why we need a viable system model. He was talking about in terms of we have now simultaneous convergence of climate breakdown, extreme inequality, political instability, technological disruption. Right.
That's Adam Two's.
Yeah. If we don't manage to have, yeah, I mean, I'm going to read up on the viable system model because even as a basic level, now that I've started, doing my own coding with AIs. Got to have a system even for that. And as a society, we're not doing very well for the largest system, are we?
And that's because industrialization is based on silos, and the problem with that is that, of course, every silo self-optimizes, and that's not necessarily good for the system as a whole. If you want to look at it from a purely political perspective, go read Madison's Federalist number 10. And factions are just like any silo in the sense that, as he said, they operate under their own self-interest, regardless of the greater good. And that's just the way that we've had to do it, because in order to achieve the level of technological progress we've achieved in the last 150 years, we couldn't just construct one system. We had to construct many systems. And the real winner is, what's that?
I'm just agreeing with you based on a note I wrote on the island this weekend. Doug's ABC system for layers.
Yeah. And the thing that Vannevar Bush recognized is that this was no longer feasible because there were too many interconnected systems, and that from a purely scientific perspective, in his mind, you lost track of all of the different pieces going together. So, if your silo doesn't necessarily include climate change, you can give lip service to climate change, but your silo is still going to operate as if it's not a problem. Individuals may believe in it. Individuals may think it's a real problem, but if the system continues to move in the direction that's programmed to move in, it's not going to fix. And so that's why I get excited when new systems start to take over. And polycrisis, that's actually Adam Tooze's term, who's an economist up at I think he's at NYU. And he, all of these interlocking political crises and that relate to climate change, but climate change also relates to the politics of oil, for instance, or the politics of scarcity. And one of the things about climate change, I was listening to something the other day, they were talking about, the nice thing about solar is that nobody can own it. Anybody who has solar cells can collect energy. And that's a power thing, because before that, you had to dig a hole in the ground and hope that the piece of particular thing you wanted to burn happened to be there. Originally, it was coal, and it was oil. And that those, as Cory Doctorow likes to say, if your state's primary business is digging holes in the ground and then putting men with guns around them, that's not a good recipe for democracy. And so we're seeing this collision right now. And I think a lot of the Reform Party / Donald Trump thing is a reflection of the old system trying to maintain itself or reassert itself against breaking down systems. And so that happens all the way from a policy standpoint all the way down to an individual, because people see their world being torn apart and they don't understand where it's going, and that's very unsettling.
Absolutely.
I mean,
and the
and so
UK map,
one of the things I want to do with the knowledge navigator real quick is it's a system for perspective. If you have the perspective, you can break out of this to a degree. But the problem is people don't have the perspective.
in the UK, by the way, it's now finally legal to have your own plug-in solar panels. You don't need the big systems. Now,
It was illegal before.
Yeah, you needed to have it properly with the grid and all kinds of stuff. But this one I wanted to show you just briefly earlier, and I'll show you this and then I'll get out of it. So inside there's the solar system. We have the huge Oort cloud around. So you see that tiny dot is the sun. So if I look at it from that, you see Pegasus?
Mm-hmm.
That's Pegasus. If I now go to Gemini, that's a bit difficult. You're all below. Yeah, so here is Ursa Major. Get rid of this thing. So if you look at it from here, it makes sense. It's the Big Dipper, right? But then, of course, in 3D space, it's not much of a Big Dipper, is it? It's a very different shape. I just think it's kind of evocative for what we're talking about, because this is something we can all look up into space and see. Of course, it's an illusion. So all these.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, what?
Oh, we're locked. We're like perspective locked on the Earth, right? So the Big Dipper never looks how it does unless you're, right over there.
Exactly.
So that's deeply interesting to me, how we can become aware of the perspective we're locked into, and how we could see other people's and maybe see from, the Big Dipper from someone else's planet. And in that system, I'm imagining each person has kind of their own planet and slightly different perspective. That's where I think a real renaissance would happen. That understanding nuance like majorly changes.
See, I've always had a bit of a warped perspective on this because I'm bicultural. I'm half German. I spent considerable amount of time in Germany. I speak German. And so I see things as much from a German perspective as I do from an American perspective. And it changes how you perceive our place in the world, and the fact that, Germany's a good sized country, but still relatively small geographically, surrounded by other countries who it's had to accommodate with or not accommodate with over its history. The United States has never really had to do that. I mean, the last time we had a serious threat was Canada in 1814, and that was it. We can just basically push around. We feel like we can push around Canada and Mexico. We don't feel like we have to engage with other people, And England's the same. Britain's kind of a mix in those senses, because it's always been an island, right? And so it doesn't feel like it doesn't have to operate like France or Germany does, and so on. But the point I'm trying to make here is that shift in perspective is very important in how I look at politics and how I look at international relations. And I want other people to have that kind of perspective. And the problem is with information overload is that you generate tunnel vision as a result, because it's a survival mechanism. You say, okay, I can't process all this stuff out here, so I'm just going to look at the stuff in my area and get really good at it and ignore everything out there. Never mind if that train is heading us over the climate change thing. And so, there are all these different, and one of my other things is systems theory. And so, seeing how different systems interact with each other, but also the system of systems, that all these things interlock with each other. And work to a greater or lesser extent toward a goal that we may or may not decide. It may be a completely political, it may be a disastrous goal, but we're all on this train and it's pushing back and forth. And if we start orienting it a certain way, it's, so how do you get that perspective on information? And I like bringing up the Douglas Adams and the infinite perspective machine or whatever that they throw Zaphod into, where you can see your place in the universe and everything around it. And it generally makes people crazy. But of course, his ego is so large that he overcomes it. But the idea that you can say, okay, I need to be humble about this, like Brandel was saying earlier, that the world is not just me. The world is not just my perspective on things. I need to understand these other perspectives. And unfortunately, politicians and ideologies try to lock you into a particular perspective. And you go with what your gut tells you there. But, and unfortunately, the other thing that's happened recently is that political parties have become more like sports teams than discussion areas for compromise and discussion. I'm a sports fan. I root for the Eagles and the Astros. I've kind of a weird combination, but I get kind of passionate about those things. But I know the reason I can is because I know it doesn't really matter. It's fun to have that tribal identity in a sense that it doesn't matter. But if I'm a Democrat and can't talk to a Republican, or if I'm Tory and I can't talk to Labor, then that's more of a problem, because that's where those edges where things get fixed. And that's where we have all these polycrises going on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how do we let the world know our perspective, and how do we
it's not about learning our perspective. It's just about getting perspective on your perspective and realizing that it's not the only way to look at the world. And there's a lot of different ways in which that happens. I do that as a teacher.
Of course, Tom. Of course. I'm saying, how do we allow ourselves to have our perspective be in a space where other people can access our perspective? So it has to work. It is a production issue, differently from an academic paper, but it's still a production issue as well, as because obviously our AIs currently all know a lot about us, but we wouldn't necessarily want that to go into the system.
Well, we may not have a choice. I mean, I've long since given up on privacy, but
but I mean, as you wouldn't necessarily want Benja to say, load Tom's perspective on this based on everything he's ever done online. That may not be how you want it. But Benja, just before I forget, my son is learning grammar and he's learning compound sentences, and it's really annoying.
Cool.
So I had to tell him that it's so hard that you have to make a system for how to deal with it. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great. That's so fun.
And when I wrote my first book, I had a good friend of mine who read it and edited it and said, get rid of all the compound sentences. If you can break it into 2 sentences, make it 2 sentences. And I've kind of developed the habit over time.
The latest I've seen for advice for how to talk to LLMs is also short sentences. This nonsense. It was also funny. I had a friend who had a relationship issue, and she was saying her boyfriend this, that, and the other today. And I said, you have to write short messages to him for a man to read. And then she said, but he wrote such a long message. Yes, it's a very different thing writing a long message than reading a long message. Write a short message to him. And that's not a man-woman thing. That's just a communication thing, in case my grammar there was a little off. The joke also, I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have the time to write you a short one.
Yeah. And that's what, I mean, I tell them, this is one of the hard lessons that I have to teach my students. I never make them write anything long, because unless they're going into academia, nobody's ever going to read anything long. And even there, and I say to them, you're never going to write anything more than a page long that your boss is actually going to read. If you write things that are 20 or 30 pages long, maybe now that'll change with AI, but this is not an effective communication method. So why am I teaching you to write a 20-page term paper? That doesn't do anything for you.
So when it comes to these perspectives, let's just be a little
Yeah.
a little hardcore on it. So one of the things that's been discussed in the community before is let's take a philosopher, Socrates, or whoever, and use some LLM thing and get Socrates' perspective. That's basic now, right? But how do you put that into an environment where you have a lot of knowledge, either people's papers, your own notes, whatever it might be, and then you have this pulsing thing in the corner, Socrates, right? Maybe it's in the shape of Socrates' sculpture head. I don't know. It's not that hard to do it in the old-fashioned way. Socrates looks at that one over there, and underneath it says, Socrates thinks this is rubbish for these reasons. That's not very visual. How can we, like, with the constellation things, how can we shapeify it?
Yeah, this is kind of where I get it. You know, you can never be sure if your brain is different from everybody else's because it's the only one you've got, and everything you see is filtered through it. And so, you know, we have this problem of projection that we look at other people and we go, oh yeah, you think just like me, or you don't think just like me. But that's never true. You never think entirely like someone else, and because everybody's shaped by their experience and their perspectives and so on and so forth.
So,
And that's the hard part to
how do we
communicate.
make it visual, Tom?
So I've been going back to looking, thinking about Vannevar Bush's associative trails, and the ways that Ted Nelson in particular iterated upon those. His basic idea that he established in As We May Think is, I want to be able to pick up the connections and hand them to you because that tells you something about the process I went through to build the thought, right? Because that to me is always more interesting. I'm always really interested in like documentaries about, musicians where they talk about how did I come up with this particular,
Right.
piece of music. And or making of stuff because to me that's where I get to see the trails in a way that I don't see in a final product.
Right. So if we then do something really specific. So we're in this room, we have 30 papers, they're all presented, like whatever. And then you are yourself in there, obviously. But also you have colleagues, friends, maybe someone you seriously academically dislike and disagree with. How would you like to see that? What would you? I mean, I have my ideas and I talk a ton, so I would really like to hear what you guys think about it. How would you like to activate? I mean, like one of my friends, we look at things like the opposite way. I would like to activate maybe his push and pull. How do you guys see that?
So when I'm sharing ideas with people, one of the first things I try to dial in on is if they're seeing the world from a zero-sum game perspective or a non-zero-sum game perspective. Or, we evoked Socrates here. If you are a dualist or a non-dualist. And so like if you're like a dualist, then you see you see systems as like balances of opposites. If you're a non-dualist, then you see the world as like systems without really any kind of center. And that's kind of the trend that we seem to be talking on here, is that like there's a lot of interconnected things that seem to influence us from the outside that we also always need to take into account. But a lot of the logics that we have been building our world in are still like hedged in this zero-sum framework. So I think that's the ultimate challenge, is kind of like detaching that enclosing effect that zero-sum game thinking can have on our ontology. Something that happened in VR society. So I'm part of like creative communities that have like built themselves from scratch. And I was just thinking about this morning again. So VRChat was this environment where all creation was really relational. Like we really didn't have moderation features. And very quickly, like similar avatars created cultures around them that tribes emerged from. And so like so there was this like non-zero-sum game in like building the environment. If you contribute something to your community, others would be invited to contribute towards it. Very quickly, though, is that some players realize that bringing weapons into the game, as in like crashing, allowed them to moderate the space, but they could also then monetize those weapons and sell them off platform to other players. And they also now they had like a game that would be to create chaos to continue selling those weapons. So now we had what was a gift economy quickly turn into a market game. And like with like this opportunity for selling like this abstract token at its core. So like I've been thinking a lot about how zero-sum games tend to take over our knowledge.
I have an aside to that, if this is a good pause.
Mhm.
So my father was a businessman, and he was of the perspective that when he does a deal, both sides benefit. Otherwise, there's no deal. Of course, there are edge cases to that, many cases where there's a monopoly squeezing someone out of business. So let's not pretend it's that simple. But that was his basic assumption, right?
That's not a deal.
No, then it wouldn't be a deal. No, exactly. But the thing is, when we look at, we're all save the world lefty do-gooders here, and that's not representative. But when we look at the models business people use and military analysts use, different kinds of people, it's so interesting, Astral, when you talked about, do you believe in A or B? I know you weren't being simplistic. That's not at all what I mean, but it may be very useful to try to use explicit models of how people see the world to help. Like, just oversimplify it, maybe a system where you answer questions of a quiz. Do you see it this way or that way? I think that could be very useful because obviously some kind of AI could probably do that to historical figures as well to try to extrapolate from what's known about them. But how important is this? Because now I'm going to be a little annoying and say, MAGA probably wouldn't accept any of the questions. How important is it for us as a community to try to reach the people who, by definition, does not want to be part of a dialogue over anything other than their one single point of view? Is that outside of our remit or is it inside?
I think it's inside. I think people have questions and they find solace in certainty. And if someone promises them certainty, they're going to flock in that direction. However, I think at the end of the day, human decency does win out. And that may be a liberal perspective, that we are not in a Lord of the Flies situation, or as Astro would put it, a zero-sum game. I can benefit and the rest of you guys can benefit as well. The way we have built up resources in today's world, the problem is not scarcity, it's distribution. And, if we can get past the hoarding of all sorts of resources from food to energy, then that changes the fundamental equation that a lot of people have to live with. But we also they have to have a perspective that the world that they've existed in and the world that their parents have existed in where they were working in a factory or working in a coal mine or whatever it happened to be, is also something that was invented over time and therefore can also be uninvented over time. And that you can say, well, did you really enjoy working in that coal mine? And they will, well, yeah, the problem is I can't afford to feed my family now because the coal mine isn't there anymore. So that's a distribution issue. And that's not a liberal conservative issue. It's an issue of human existence. And I think that if you show the connections between the two and you don't turn it into a cartoon of woke versus anti-woke or whatever it is, then which is then the politician's advantage because they want you to pretend that politics is a team sport, like the Eagles versus the Cowboys or something like that. That's an unhealthy way of looking at democracy. And so, yes, if you can show, I firmly believe that if you can show people their position in the universe and a way of ways of alternative ways, not just one, but ways in which they can work their way out of it or work their way out of an unpleasant situation, I think that would be appealing to the vast majority of people. Sure, there's a few ideologues out there that are never going to be convinced, but I think the 80-90% of people in the middle don't really care about the stuff most of the politicians are talking about for that reason. So I don't think it's a matter of not being able to convince people. Benja?
Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, I think okay, so I love this kind of stuff. The best, most practical route I can see about going about this, really the only one I can think of, is just going fully relying on language and words, glossary, like they say that we only use, I'm going to pull a number out of my butt, but like, something like 2,000 unique words in the English language or something. And they have that for other languages of origin as well. But that's almost like a Venn diagram, what words you use. And that's before we even get into definition, right? Like, let me share my screen for 2 seconds here.
Oh, no rush in sharing your screen.
Okay. Um, all right. I don't know if you all have seen this. We got XKCD, which is great. We've got something called the Symbol Writer, which I think is very fascinating. You can put in different words here, and it will only like allow you to put in words that are within, I think, like maybe the 150 or maybe the 500 most common words in the English language.
So he wrote a book a number of years ago where basically everything, I think it's called Thing Explainer. I have it back here, but it's too far for me to reach without walking out off screen. But it's basically describing pretty much everything in the world, but only using the 1,000 most common words in the English language. So I'm assuming this is working off of the same thing.
Yes, I think so. But Frode, when you're talking about making this practical, and then we're talking about figuring out how we can see maybe the overlap in perspectives, we can see maybe we had some kind of like chat type interface. And let's say it was just between two people. So let's say Astral and I are chatting back and forth, and we can only use the 1,000 most common words in the English language. However, we can type other words that aren't, in the approved common list, but then we have to both agree on a definition of it as we will use just in this conversation. So I think it's almost too big a problem to try to say, oh, how can we chart out the perspectives of this paper, that paper, all 30 of them, plus my own, plus Socrates. I almost want to bring it. I think there's enough complexity to just say, Astral and I, just for this conversation, like a 30-minute chat, where do we agree on almost the new uncommon glossary that we have that's specific to how we use it in that chat? Or how do they differ? And where are we both like, oh, I won't budge on the definition of this word or that? Like, I love it when people use woke. I see people using the word woke on both sides of the aisle different ways. There's not just two ways. I mean, we can generalize, but people are using these differently. It wasn't always like considered pejorative primarily, and when you see it in print, I think it's just deeply fascinating because I think there's a little constellation of definitions, even down to just the word woke, that I think is very rich and very historied. And then there's just a ton of parrots as well that are just like, well, this person said it like this. That's my new moniker for something, positive, negative. I'm not really trying to bring in what ought to be, just as a practical way of how to maybe parse out differences in perspective. We're to rely entirely on words. So it's a way to make it simple.
So leave this up. This is really fascinating. So I think I have something here, but a couple of months ago, I had a conversation with a very woke, very tech's not going to help hippie type person on the definition of the word consciousness. I believe I was referring to just something being aware of itself in the world. I believe she was talking about higher levels of consciousness, more spiritual, as in being aware of the connectedness of all things and all of that stuff. So I could imagine sitting in a space with another person and trying to define a word like freedom. Freedom to have a gun or freedom from your neighbor having a gun, right? It might be really interesting to spatially, visually map that out, maybe manually, definitely recorded as two people speaking, but maybe also some kind of means through which different axes have different kind of like let's say, just for the sake of fun, we have a far right person and a far left person in the same room, right? And their definition of, let's say, the word freedom is probably going to be very different. So let's say one of them, for the sake of stereotyping, goes more towards individual freedom. I need to have a gun. The other one goes towards group freedom. I need to not feel threatened by people with guns, right? These are maybe relatively clear, going away from a vague central definition. But
I think just to add on, I feel like is a quick, both these things are like people's like assessment of how they can act without fear. So freedom may just
exactly the point. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm.
Oh no, please keep talking. I was just excited. You're absolutely hit nail on head.
Yeah, I think like, this how we act without fear, and like how do we I think of things from the perspective of play, and like play being the freedom that we have to take actions within constraints. And typically for those that are, capable of having appreciation for things and able to say thank you, we also play for self-gratification as well. But like the freedoms, like this, the environment that we're in, how we perceive that environment, it very much like has an impact on the things that we fear. And I'm just relating this back to the guns in the environment. You were mentioning earlier that like intelligence, it may be distributed. And like as we're learning more about how the cells in our bodies seem to be agents themselves, like they're able to take in types of learnings. And there's a fascinating guy, his name is Michael Levin. His lab is talking about like what is going to be like like new regenerative medicine that is like probably what we're going to be referring to as bioprompting someday. And this is like using bioelectrical communication to literally ask cells to grow an eye here on a tadpole's tail. And they do that. So the question is like, how does the body network itself? And where did we go wrong building our networks for our scale of intelligence? And now here's the hypothesis. If we wire cities properly, do cities then become players like Ludens on our planet?
I think they already are to an extent, but I think what you're so wonderfully provocatively saying is how can we make that more and better?
I'm just like, I believe that our current systems have been built with zero-sum games as their premise.
Well, yeah, because they're built on profit. Profit is a zero-sum game. End of
So
story.
your heart doesn't necessarily value the input of your brain more than your stomach. Or like your brain doesn't really, like, it also thinks with its stomach and other parts.
An army marches on its stomach, as Napoleon says.
I mean, the whole discussion around markets and capital is a really interesting extension. I mean, there's a very right-wing person that I know who's all about, capitalism is best for everything, blah, blah, blah. I think he's really talking about markets and commerce. But of course, you always need markets and commerce to some degree. Question is, in capitalist side, what does capitalist mean? It means capital. The money itself holds the power, right? So there's complications there. But Astral, you talked about safety. And one of the things, of course, we have two systems, one here and one here, interpreting the environment around us. The first one is, am I safe? Before we're allowed to do the second one. And that has to be extended into everything that we do here. People have to be allowed to feel safe. If the environment is safe, of course, if someone hijacks it, it makes you feel safe in an unsafe environment. It's not so clever.
He that sacrifices liberty in the search for security deserves neither. Benjamin
That is
Franklin.
the most American nonsense ever. Absolutely don't buy that one. You kind of have to have a balance.
So in nature,
Well,
like when
yeah.
two systems interact, there's always a leftover. So this is like the core premise that there's no real such thing as a zero-sum game in nature. And the systems that we make used to like only existed in Homo sapiens' head at once upon a time. And so but at one point, I think the very first times our system spilled out to create a zero-sum game in the real world was when we created locks for the first time. Now this is like the first time in human history where a system cannot be argued with in human terms. And these locks, of course, like have become they became very powerful and they shaped our society. Now, we do have an interesting moment in current history where we could build locks that can rearrange themselves based on how they feel. And we've only just in the last 100 years have seen ourselves as a creature that has a global impact as well. So we're not really super overdue for a realignment in perspective.
So
and we also have super lock pickers now.
Right.
So this is really interesting. We're talking about zero-sum and all of that. There's a very big difference, of course, between the individual and the ecosystem, right? Like an animal wants to eat and procreate. It doesn't care about the environment, right? There's no bird that is in sync and harmony. What is in sync and harmony is the environment and the ecosystem which it lives, right? So if you agree on that premise, human behavior, I mean, you're talking about locks. There's also, for instance, in Arabia, about 600 years ago, they invented the saddle for the camel, which meant that the traders not only had to go around the peninsula every year, they could start hoarding stuff. So you started having severe income inequalities. This was the environment which Muhammad was born into. So a lot of his early perspective on life, and hence Islam, blah, 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 was based on the technology of being able to gather more stuff, right? But individuals, we here, I mean, none of you are paid to be here. I'm not paid to be here. We are, the four of us and the rest of the community by nature, wanting to collaborate, contribute, give, and produce, right? A lot of people don't. And we can argue with them that they should.
Why don't they is the question.
Yeah, why don't they? I mean, there are many things. One of the things, I guess, would be insecurity. Some people, depending on their background, may feel very insecure and therefore may need power in different ways. Like the sentence, if you think a powerful person can do a lot, just look at what an insecure person can do, and look at Trump.
How about an insecure, powerful person?
Yeah, like Trump and Putin. They are both very, very insecure people who have a huge amount of power because they work bloody hard to get it. Right? So this is what, when Astral was saying all these things, including, and I think at the very, very core, feeling safe, right? Because when you contribute something, you open yourself for criticism and ridicule. Right? And you should be criticized and ridiculed, but in a very safe, fun manner. If you say something silly, the environment really does matter. So,
who decides what's silly?
That's a good
Group,
point.
the gestalt of the group.
Yeah, but silly should be okay when you're with very close friends. Say that was the stupidest thing I've ever heard. and your friends will know that you're joking. They will know by the context and body language. So we have, being
Context, yeah.
exactly right, and security. And the reason I've worked way too hard on Interatlas is I really hope that by people putting it on and learning a little bit about geography, and then realize you can keep zooming out, you see all the known stars, how absolutely tiny we are, and we need to pull together as a species. It is the overview effect, seeing the globe from space as an astronaut. We need to do things where people who are insecure and feel threatened here have a sense of belonging and community.
Or make them even more insecure and threatened. Because
Well,
I'm just this dot in the universe.
I'm sure you've also lived through phases of one relatively homogenous culture, and then another culture comes in, and there's a lot of racism and all kinds of nonsense. Then it kind of mellows over dinner. They're bringing kind of good food with them, right? That happens a lot. When people feel safe.
Especially in England.
Yeah, no, especially in London, absolutely, 100%. I mean, our national dish is Indian, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Officially.
Something that feels relevant to this is reading the book Sapiens right now, by something Harari, is the
Noah
author.
Harari.
Yuval Noah
Yes,
Harari.
thank you.
Yes.
And they were talking about, I think they had brought up Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number is like this kind of magic number of 150. And then I think the reasoning for why like tribes, I think it was, like can't grow past 150, is that at least in our biology, or however our brains are kind of mapped together, we can feel safe. We can feel like we understand my relationship to, say, Frode, and I know my relationship to Tom and to Astral. Once that gets to 150, I can map out just my relationship well enough. But because I'm in this group, I'm like, oh, hold on a second. Even though I've, say, grown up in this tribe, I now can't figure out the relationship between Tom and Astral or Tom and Frode. And that makes me uneasy. I start feeling scared. What if they're working against me? So it's that kind of, I don't know, this is a kind of base belief that I haven't been able to shake, is that we're just simple. We're very simple beings, and we can't really map out something very large. We have to.
We do. Nationalism, race, football teams, music, right? We have all these things. Oh, you're also a so-and-so supporter.
Sure.
Right? And these are very artificial. And when they come against other groups, not very good. But, are there more ways? You refer to the book Sapiens. I listened to it on tape while I was doing my PhD. Wonderful book. Hang on a second. Emily, can you close my door, please? Thanks. What can we do to make people have that kind of wider connection, or part of their identity is this? I mean, yeah, please go ahead.
Just another perspective that I was kind of leading to after what I was talking about VR earlier. So these players that had like kind of invented this power game by selling weapons eventually became like part of the board of the platform recently, and like a year ago. So like, VRChat was on this precipice. Like, do we go for profit? Do we go nonprofit? And these players went out by making their connections with other people that wanted to sell on the platform. And it was frustrating because oftentimes the people that were advocating for these decisions were quite secure themselves, but kind of offered like the bare change that this marketplace could have to kind of cope with that by offering that to other players. Anyway, but now the platform has on your profile page a mall and a little wallet icon that shows how many virtual dollars you have. And I've noticed a very distinct difference now in the year and a half since this system really went live in the perspectives of the space from new players. People entering the space for the first time don't see avatars and worlds as relational anymore. They just see them all first and foremost and how many dollars things are worth. So I think part of this is like, you can just like,
they've introduced a zero-sum game.
It did. But I'm saying also like the way that we read our environment is involuntary also. So like you can kind of explain to someone in words But, in Dungeons and Dragons, we have perception in the wisdom stat, not the intelligence stat, because it's something that we feel. And I think, when we're talking about ontology is the thing that we feel is true to us without lying to ourselves at the base level. And it's really hard to approach that with I'm getting a call. 1 second. Anyway, to approach that, just on a basic logical level.
And
Especially
what
in
is
text,
that?
people will read it with their own voice.
Right. And what is that basic, level is a tricky question. Now, I'm admittedly a bit of a postmodernist constructionist, and the sense that looking at the XKCD tool that Benja just showed us, and I love XKCD. Don't get me wrong, Randall Monroe is awesome, but I asked Gemini what Michel Foucault would have thought of that. And is it giving, and he said, well, on the one hand, it would show us that these things are all relative, that, you can play with language in a very open way. But in another, by limiting you to 1,000-word vocabulary, you've just decreased the size of your prison cell, because you can only use these words, right? Who gets to choose that list? And so on and so forth. And so, this is where things get really, and language is, I firmly believe language is power. And that's why I tend to deprecate at some level the utility of text, because what I say with a word isn't necessarily going to resonate with you, and it might even offend you. And that's a problem when it comes to, again, this tribalism, because if the other tribe doesn't speak the same language, even though they may both speak English, I speak biology English and you speak chemistry English, and we don't understand each other. The really silly one, go into engineering for a while, mechanical and all these different kinds of engineering, and they don't talk to each other. Like, it's all engineering, for Christ's sake. But as we've gotten more complicated in the industrial world and this information overload has happened, we've felt the need to structure this. And of course, this is what Foucault was talking about, that these groups develop a language of power. In order to enter that group, you have to use that language. And in a sense, Randall Monroe is playing with that by stripping that away. But in another sense, he's developing a different language of power. You can't fully escape the prison. You're always going to go to a different prison. The question is whether you like it better or not. Yeah.
That's a very good point. And I think there's an interesting thing here as well. That is, Astral, I'm sure you'll know who I'm talking about. I can't remember the name, but there was a philosopher, I think it was during the 80s, who was talking about AI and say AI doesn't understand anything, because let's imagine you're working with Chinese characters and you don't speak Chinese, you don't read Chinese, you know nothing. But after doing lots of maths, you realize if you do these characters and then this one should come afterwards, that's AI. It's just doing autocompletion without understanding. But that is, of course, exactly how humans operate too. Right? It was very, very odd. There was some video on Twitter recently. It's like, how can this be a serious philosophical argument? Here today we talked about agreeing on the definition of the word freedom, for crying out loud, and how that differs.
I think the difference is that, we assign meaning to things that are within our lived worlds, our environment, the place that kind of gives us life, where these AIs are really just kind of trying to take that read the shadows of the walls on how we feel about things, and then just make its best guess analysis of this. A thing I think about is you could not describe the taste of eating a mango in a way that anyone else could understand. But that's the only knowledge that these AI systems have been trained on.
Oh, yeah. But this is not me bigging up the understanding of AI. A few months ago, I had conversations with Claude on exactly that, and Claude said exactly what you said. What I'm more trying to say is that our own experiences are built on sand, and with our more introspection, we have more control over that, and also more understanding of the biology of our own brains, the more understanding and the more humility we may get. I think I am absolutely preaching to the choir here. This is not me teaching you anything. I'm just saying that from our development point of view, maybe we should really look at how to externalize our things beyond writing on a traditional A4 sheet of paper, and to allow the relationship of how we see things to be shared with others, and to have other perspectives on top of ours. I mean, I would love to be able to do something as simple, and I mean this in a respectful way, as Benji's subclauses system. And, you know, he writes, let's say, I mean, maybe we do this as a real exercise. Hypertext is useful because it allows us, you know, you write stuff, and then you allow another person who has an interest and respect to go through that and tear it apart. You know, not as in you are wrong, but my perspective is this. You know, hypertext is a silly old thing, or whatever. You know,
this is why I'm constantly harping on the idea. The problem with text is it creates an object. Once you assemble text into a thing, it's an object. Okay. The most important thing about that object, though, is its relationship to the other objects in the system.
Exactly.
And so that to me is why everybody focused on text is a kind of missing the point, because text is loaded. It has a bunch of relationships around it based on the definitions of the words, based on your cultural perspective of those words. You know, and these are words that you're allowed to use, and these are words that you're not allowed to use, and so on and so forth. And that's shifted over the last 50 years. And I think that's part of what drives the whole anti-woke thing. But it's a true thing, because the people who are fighting that are not being silly about language. They understand that language is a system of power. No. And that as long as you can talk about things in a certain way, you're going to double down on that power. And this is where I get really ticked off at people who are like, oh, well, now you're discriminating against whites or whatever. And you're like, no, you can't discriminate against the people who've had the power all along. I mean, yes, you can reduce that power, but it's never discrimination.
The thing about text is it clarifies things, right? You say the word freedom, you've said the word freedom. When you think, it's probably something fuzzy off in the back of your head, right? What if we could manage to develop a system that is, let's say, multi-user, where we write about something, and instead of over here, you respond to it, you can change the shape of the original arguments. So we're working on an abstract level, so as a short text about something.
I'm thinking in terms of mathematical postulates right now. Like, these are like things that we assume to be true that allow us to get to 1 + 1 = 2. And like, maybe there's something like this that can be broken from language. I was thinking about that XKCD thing. And like, maybe the system just starts like, you know, finding between the two players, I guess, understanding of that word, you know, breaking it all the way down to the postulate level.
The key thing there, though, is you cannot put the creator of the tool cannot put their finger on it. In other words, they can't push the scale down, because that's going to introduce an automatic bias. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the knowledge navigator, in the sense that I don't want the ontology built in, because I am affecting the shape of the output when I do that. I want it to show me possible ontologies, and I can decide whether they're worth pursuing or not. But I don't want I don't want to be able to have to go in there and say, this is a person, and this person is significant because ... I don't want that. I want to see persons' ideas. These people know each other. They've talked to each other. Their ideas have merged and melded and come apart, and so on and so forth. That to me is really interesting. But if I go in there and I say, this guy's a biologist and this guy's a chemist,
right,
therefore they belong in different pockets, then I've lost that ability. To me, that's the really interesting thing about AI, is because you have this fluid dynamic in a way that pre-AI databases ultimately are binary. You go down to the zeros and the ones.
Well, when we look at the kind of actual implementation of this, I can imagine something as, let's talk about immigrants. Big deal here in the UK, obviously in America too, because there's a little social media thing that relates to this. So some person was shown a ball of candy, and shown, this represents the population. One of these is immigrants over the last year, blah, blah, blah. But it was kind of a numerical in her face thing that helped her think about it, right? So imagine we're having a discussion where someone writes, we're being overrun by immigrants, something like that, right? And instead of just writing literally down, someone can then, in the space, say, well, there is X amount of immigrants per blah, blah, blah. As in, they make a rebuttal. But these things are connected, and of course they can have a proper citation source you can blow up and you can see where something is from. But the point is, maybe we can do 3D graffiti is what I'm trying to say.
Graffiti's the right word. Yeah, I like that. Because then, I mean, as the, let's say it's still just two participants chatting. Let's say I open up with something, then Frode comes in and let's say replaces, makes some selection of text, writes over it to say, okay, now I can agree with this. And then death to object program. Yeah, I don't know. But then also, Tom, like when you were saying that, you know, to write text is to create objects, it's well, like I feel like I don't feel too imprisoned by just that bit. I know we are talking about language as prison in a different sense, but these are just fingers pointing at a moon, right? Like this is just our best little bird call to try to invoke whatever that fuzzy crystallized thing is in someone else's mind. And it's a cloud that's slightly fuzzier, like it's on a different space. It's crystallized a slightly different way. But these are just, I mean, we're just barking at each other. We're very simple little things. I'm just like making noises out of my mouth. So I feel like it's just our best vehicle unless we're communicating through what it's still going to be symbols and pictures. We're kind of bound to our eyes or our ears. And I think we can certainly do far better than the phonetic. But I don't know. To me,
Well,
this is like our best shot. Like I don't see any other vehicle. We have to.
I will caution you though. Yeah, I will caution though that we are subject to the Judeo-Christian Islamic world where good and evil are binary, and that is something that if colors all of these things, and it colors our language. Absolutely, it colors our language. We do not have words for certain kinds of gray areas because they don't exist in our philosophy. So if you go into Buddhism or a non-Judeo-Christian system, the languages that are built around that are going to reflect those realities in a way that are very different. And they may be very productive for us to say, you know what? It's not climate change or the end of the world. There's this other path. And just because we're looking at it you either fix climate change or we all die, that's a binary. If you look at it in those terms, then it's going to generate certain kinds of outcomes. But if you look at it in a different term, like say maybe an Indian would or a Japanese would or something like that, would in the perspective of their non-Western belief systems, you might get a different answer, and it may be the one that's right. Because the other thing is we also are very colonialist in terms of our thinking, and that, this is all the British's fault, that, that everybody should think like us. And we have a civilizing role to play in the world. And what that means is you click people into this binary thought process in this uniquely English form, but you click people into this binary thought process, which has, has associated itself with civilization. And so these other cultures have also been deprecated as being inferior to Western culture because of power, not because they're necessarily smarter or dumber. It's because of power. Yeah. And so, I still remember going into a Nigerian church here in Texas, and everybody in the congregation is Nigerian, right? So, but the Jesus on the wall is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. I'm like, what's wrong with this picture, right? But that's exactly what we're talking about here, right? And so language reflects that. So we have to be careful And I know that opens a ton of
It
can of
does.
worms. Yeah.
Absolutely, Tom. And I'm not sure if I agreed with the first bit of the religions, but whatever. We could talk about that another day. But Astro,
Well,
please
religion is
go
a
ahead.
proxy.
Yeah, yeah.
Religion's a proxy for culture, and it's not a good one, but it's
Yeah.
what you got.
So
I'm limited by my language. Sorry, go ahead.
I actually just wanted to share an interesting thing I learned recently about. So the symbol, the yin yang, is one of the most misunderstood symbols in the West. It's typically seen as like a balance between good and evil, light and dark. But the original text for the yin and yang actually depict the sun hitting the side of a mountain at different times of day. So it's actually like a symbol of change, with like the central thing being seen in different lights, or just as time progresses, even moving on. And like the concept that we know today was actually derived from Persians that had moved to Greece, and kind of adopted their perspectives at the time.
Just
I love that. That's yeah. No, I love that imagery. I didn't know that origin. I'm gonna need to drop off here. I gotta get back to the paying work, but I'm happy to. I think maybe I'll try to make a prototype that maybe I can publish. Maybe everyone can mess around with in say 3 weeks. We'll have to see how everything shakes out, but um,
That would be very
yeah,
good. Yeah. Sorry, please go ahead.
uh, yeah, something around this idea that I love the 3D graffiti bit. I'm also myself a little perspective locked into just language and text being the vehicle for these things. Um, but yeah, anyway, that's going to be my goal, is to get something out to you all, be able to, you know, putz around on, and obviously I'll be very open to, please rip it apart. I think we're all on the same team of like, we need all perspectives. We're only the richer, right? For an additional perspective, even if it completely is opposite to us. The mountains. We need all of that. We're only the better for it. We're not looking to become homogenous or all use the same language,
I've
but
been
to
really wondering
co-develop it together.
I've been wondering if there's any of these Asian models that are kind of being developed with this ontology at their core. And it's been hard to find any writing on that in English.
Look at Zuckerberg's recent thing that he put out, was like yesterday or the day before, and he explicitly references the different approach that the Chinese models are taking to the American models, and that's partially cultural. And he wants to build his model based on the Chinese models and in an open sense. And so it's interesting.
It is interesting and worth talking about, and we do have to wind down. So just in closing, I would like to say that going forward, yes, I'm going to work more on the whole proceedings thing, but also what we probably are working on is a dialogue system for people who actually want to make the world better. Right? This is not a general back and forth. Do you want to own a handgun? This is about what do we do together to make things more reasonable. I see a lot of shaking. Astral, are you shaking your head too?
Yes.
All right. I look forward to Monday. Hope you can make it, and we'll keep on going. And Benja, I look forward to your prototype at some point soon. All right. Thanks so much for coming on a Tuesday. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for all your perspectives. So long.
It's been very good. I'm very grateful too. Thank you.